So please, Jared, thank you for joining and go ahead.
Well, thank you, Jatin, and great to be with all of you today. And I'm here to talk about a subject that I've been working on now for about 4 or 5 years. And in the discussion today, I'm going to talk about a number of different things, and I'm going to cram a lot into my 20 minutes here. But I'm happy to share the slide presentation with anyone who wants to see it afterwards if I go too fast. So we're going to talk about what are neurotechnologies, why are they advancing so quickly, what are neuro rights and why are they needed, why is this a current problem, and then what kind of legal and regulatory frameworks might make sense to be developed, looking at the UN at the national level and with companies as well. So I think it's first always good in these kinds of discussions to start with defining some terms. What are neurotechnologies? These are devices that record or alter the activity of the brain and the wider nervous system. At the heart of neurotechnologies are what are called brain-computer interfaces or brain-machine interfaces that connect your brain to other devices and facilitate communication. Neural data is the information that's generated by measuring the activity of your central peripheral nervous system. There are direct methods and indirect methods to do this, and there are lots of different ways in which neurotechnologies can measure brain activity. And then also very important for our purposes is that there are 2 kinds of neurotechnologies. There are invasive neurotechnologies, which requires neurosurgery, and then non-invasive technologies, which is really the focus of what we'll be talking about today, which are really about to take off in a dramatic way around the world. And these are caps, hats, helmets, wristbands, and so forth. So what are some examples of neurotechnologies? Well, you've probably heard of these 2. There's deep brain stimulation that's been around for several decades that can treat certain medical conditions. And there are also cochlear implants that help people who have serious problems with hearing. More recently, there have been some extraordinary developments in neurotechnologies. This was a headline from last year in the New York Times. This is about a woman who was paralyzed and nonverbal for 18 years. She can now communicate at 70 words a minute with 90% accuracy, thought to text translation. And not only were the scientists able to do that, but her face is also paralyzed as well from the stroke. And you could actually also decode the intended muscle movements of the person's face. And so an avatar was constructed of her communicating as well as decoding her facial muscle movements as well. And she went from being locked in to be able to communicate fluidly with her family for the first time in this extended period of time. So what are non-invasive or wearable technologies? Well, they've been around for some time, but they're really starting to come into their own now. A person who is paraplegic was able to kick off the World Cup in a robotic suit controlled by their mind. Another example of how a person was quadriplegic who can now drive an Indy race car using their thoughts as well. We can not just decode thoughts, but we're also being able to start to decode images. And in this particular study, what happened was that people were shown a series of images of different objects, and then they were shown a movie that had all those images in it. And as you can see on the right side is what's on what they're seeing on their screen, and then having decoded from their thoughts the words that they are thinking in their own head at the time in which they are looking at these images. So why are neurotechnologies advancing so quickly? A number of reasons. One is it really began with President Obama and the Brain Initiative in the United States that is investing an enormous amount of money. You can see that it was followed by many other brain initiatives around the world. This is really research into the primary science to advance the field. And an enormous amount has been already invested into neurotech companies, and the market for brain-computer interfaces is growing 17% annually. But really, these numbers are about to go exponential, as I'll explain shortly. Today, right now, these wearable BCIs are really run by EEG scanners, which have a comparatively low resolution, but the increases in portable brain scanning devices in terms of the resolution is happening rapidly. And this new kernel flow helmet is the equivalent of, in essence, having an MRI machine in a helmet. And that machine is ordinarily about an $800,000 piece of equipment. And what this means is that we're going to be able to understand what's happening in our own brains much more than ever before. Generative AI is also rapidly accelerating the development of neurotech. In December of 2023, there's this study you'll see here about a wearable BCI helmet that can actually do thought-to-text translation. Right now, only at 40% accuracy, but this is with a wearable device, and it's expected in 2 to 3 years that the accuracy for this device will probably exceed 90%, which is when, in my view, we will have a ChatGPT moment for neurotechnologies. When ChatGPT came out, this was the big kind of breakthrough in terms of public understanding of what is AI about. And this is going to happen in the field of neurotechnologies quite soon. So, what are the risks of misuse and abuse of these technologies? And in thinking about this with my colleague Raphael Yuste, who's one of the world's leading experts at neurotechnologies and runs the Neurotech lab at Columbia, he and his colleagues originally a number of years ago came up with 5 areas of specific concern about misuse and abuse of neurotech. And they're around mental privacy, around personal identity, around free will, around protection from bias, and around fair access to mental augmentation. Now, there is already a number of different rights that you have under international law and international treaties, such as a right to privacy under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which also has within it a right to freedom of thought and conscience, a right to freedom of opinion and expression. And as we thought a lot about what was going to be needed to protect people from misuse and abuse of neurotechnologies, what we're really talking about is not actually creating new human rights, but really further interpreting existing rights to ensure that these 5 areas of concern are being addressed. I'm often asked, what are the nightmare scenarios for neurotech, gone wrong? First, the first 3 are quite near term. The first is that we are expected to have a wearable device that can decode thought to text with very high levels of accuracy within the next few years. That in and of itself could be a good thing, but obviously tech is neutral in its values and can also be used obviously for bad purposes. There's every reason to expect that unfortunately there will be a torture device that will be developed from wearable neurotechnologies. In essence, because you can learn to, because we're already seeing advances in the lab and turning off misfiring neurons that are causing people pain. Once that technology is really perfected, once you can turn off the neurons, you can turn them back on. And what can be done in an implantable device today with enough time is really always able to be converted into a wearable device as well. And then lastly, again, positive and negatives here, but BCIs have already been used to disrupt impulses that a person is having in their mind. First with mice in terms of weight loss, but this is now undergoing a study in humans. And you can imagine, terrible misuse of this kind of technology as well in the way that I'm describing as it relates to LGBT people. While you couldn't change a person's innate character, you could, if somebody wanted to do something terrible to another person, and you're talking about, for example, a parent with a child, you could force them to have a device implanted that would disrupt any sexual attraction they had in kind of real time to a same-sex person. So a couple of other quick, scenarios, again, could be positive or negative, but there's every reason to think that neural markers are going to be able to identify people who are committing crimes, like Tom Cruise's film, The Minority Report. It's also expected that BCIs will be able to become an unbeatable lie detector test. On the one hand, that could help exonerate a person, but then imagine if laws were adopted to force a person to wear those while being interrogated, or imagine them being used by rogue states. There are also questions about, who we are as humans and what impact is that going to have on us. And you can imagine here the idea that, if you can control, a person's, character traits, like whether they're an introvert or an extrovert, then ultimately you're going to be in a position to be able to change your personality in various ways based on, in the near term, really only implantable devices. This is still, a ways off, though. And then lastly, I think I'm also quite concerned, as well as my colleagues, about, the development of this technology as a driver of further inequality. There was already a study from Boston University last year that studied short-term memory in senior citizens, and in the results with electrical stimulation being applied to their skull in the areas of the skull where underneath memory is controlled. With electrical stimulation, you can actually increase the short-term memory of a senior citizen in their memorization of a list of 20 items by literally 40% in a study that's been peer-reviewed and published. Now imagine, at your university, if some students could afford that technology and some could not, and how is that going to impact inequality, on an ongoing basis around the world? So why is this, especially a big problem now? In short, invasive neurotechnologies, are already strictly regulated as medical devices and subject to health privacy laws. But these consumer devices, which are non-invasive, even though they use medical grade brain scanning technologies like EEG, are actually subject to virtually no regulation. These are examples of 30 of these products that are now available on the market that you can buy today. Probably few of them are devices that you may have heard of, but they're usable for things like determining if you're in a meditative state when you meditate, or helping you monitor and improve your sleep. There are gaming devices, for example. You can fly a helicopter drone with your thoughts, and they're kind of do-it-yourself devices, which enables like an at-home neuro scientist or someone with some neuroscience background to be able to create software and use a wearable brain computer interface in order to to download neural data and to analyze it in accordance with the software that people are developing. But while these devices are kind of lesser known, the big tech giants are getting into the game. Meta, Apple, and Snap in particular. Meta has a $1 billion neurotech arm called Control Labs, and that they acquired for $1 billion. Apple last year filed a patent for its next generation AirPods that are going to have built-in EEG sensors in it. This means that really we're talking no more than a few years before it's going to be quite possible, and indeed quite likely, that Apple will be enabling you, for example, to send a text message with your thoughts. If you've got an iPhone and you're wearing their earbuds, you're going to be able to not only open up, the text messaging app on your phone, but dictate an app with your thoughts. Dictate a message with your thoughts, and then hit send. And on the one hand, again, that could be quite convenient, but of course, one can also imagine as you're wearing, these AirPods, what other information is Apple going to be gathering in terms of your thoughts, your brain states, and so forth. And then Snap is using Neurotech and integrating BCIs into its augmented reality products as well. We published last April a landmark study on consumer neurotech products, which was really looking at the user agreements of these 30 products that I was just describing, and applying half a dozen global privacy standards to them across 5 thematic areas of concern. And what we found overall was that there's an enormous gap between what one would hope for in terms of protections in these consumer devices and what global best practices are. And this is very much why we have started working not only in the US, but around the world on trying to advance national legislation and state legislation in the United States to try to protect against the risks of misuse and abuse that I was talking about. So this is in April, we had a bill that we got adopted in Colorado that for the first time, actually at the state level in the United States, has brought neural data within the protections of the Colorado Consumer Privacy Act, the CCPA. It was necessary to do that because it turns out that when you look at the global privacy standards around the world, neural data generally is not protected by these global standards. And that's because these kinds of global standards protect things like biometric data and genetic data and sometimes biological data, but neural data actually is none of those 3. Neural data is electrical, and there's an unintentional loophole in how these global privacy, consumer data privacy laws have been set up, where they unintentionally exclude neural data, which is why you need to bring neural data within those protections. We similarly just recently had another major victory in California. That's going to be an especially big deal because, of course, California is the home of big tech companies, and of course, an enormous amount of investment and R&D is being done in Silicon Valley. And you can see here, that we were able to include neural data as personal sensitive information. I should note that under your Canadian privacy laws, which I did take a quick look at, right now, neural data would not be protected, but the interpretation of your privacy law by your data privacy commissioner has a whole set of guidance, interpretive guidance as to what should be considered sensitive personal information and what could, in theory, protect neural data in Canada simply by asking the data privacy commissioner to amend that guidance to include neural data as one of the areas of sensitive private information as well. So lastly, I want to turn to legal and regulatory frameworks beyond just the two examples I did in the United States. What you can see here is around the world, what's being done in terms of both hard and soft law frameworks. It's worth noting, for example, in Chile, there was a constitutional amendment adopted a year ago that actually created a constitutional right of mental privacy in Chile. There have also been at the state level in Brazil, protections provided in one particular state in Brazil, and they're working on that at a federal level. And Mexico is also working at this as a federal level. Spain is also. And we've also been engaging with global consumer data privacy bodies, such as the GDPR authority in Brussels, to ensure that these data privacy laws are properly interpreted to protect the misuse and abuse of neural data itself. See here, I'm trying to get to the next. Here we go. And then I think that I've kind of covered a lot of ground here and managed to do this, I think, within actually about 17 minutes rather than 20. So I've thrown a lot at you, and I'm sure there's a lot of questions you might have, but look forward to the discussion from here.
That was brilliant, Jared. Thank you so much.